For over 60 years, this little boy has been waiting for someone to give him his name back. Today, we're diving into one of America's most heartbreaking unsolved mysteries. On February 25th, 1957, a young college student was checking his muskrat traps in a wooded area of Fox Chase, a neighborhood in northeast Philadelphia. Lying on the ground, partially hidden by branches, was a large cardboard box. Inside that box was the naked body of a small boy. The student initially thought it might be a discarded doll. In those days, people dumped all sorts of things in those woods. This was a real child, and he was dead. The young man didn't call the police immediately. In fact, he didn't report his discovery at all. Whether from shock, fear, or simply not wanting to get involved, we'll never know. But he told others about what he'd seen, and eventually the story made its way to the authorities. The official discovery came just a few days later when a passing motorist saw the box and investigated. On February 26th, 1957, the Philadelphia Police Department responded to what would become one of the most baffling cases in American criminal history. The box was a JC Penney bassinet box, the kind used to transport cribs. Inside, wrapped in a flannel blanket, was the body of a young boy who appeared to be between 4 and 6 years old. The scene itself was deeply disturbing. The child had been placed in the box carefully, almost respectfully, with his head resting against the side. But the condition of his body told a different story entirely. This was a child who had suffered. Let me paint a picture of what investigators found that day, because understanding the condition of this little boy is crucial to understanding why this case has remained unsolved for so long. The boy was small for his age, malnourished, weighing only about 30 pounds. He had distinctive features that investigators hoped would help identify him: light brown to dark blonde hair, blue eyes, and what witnesses described as a slender build. But it wasn't just his size that stood out. The boy showed signs of long-term neglect and abuse. His hair had been cut very recently, so recently that clippings were still found on his body. This wasn't a professional haircut. His fingernails and toenails had been trimmed, and his body had been washed, though not thoroughly. Someone had tried to clean him up, but why? The autopsy revealed even more troubling details. There were bruises in various stages of healing. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was blows to the head, but the boy had also been severely malnourished. His stomach was empty, except for a small amount of what appeared to be beans or some kind of vegetable matter. This child had been starving. In 1957, medical records were kept, and surgical procedures on children were documented. If they could find out where he'd had surgery, they might be able to identify him. But despite checking with every hospital in the Philadelphia area and beyond, no records matched this boy. It was as if he had never existed in any official capacity. The Philadelphia Police Department launched what would become one of the most extensive missing persons investigations in American history. They were certain that someone, somewhere, was missing this child. In 1957, it wasn't easy for a child to simply disappear without anyone noticing. Someone should have reported him missing. The police distributed over 800,000 flyers. They went door to door in the neighborhoods surrounding Fox Chase. They checked with every school, every church, every social service agency. They interviewed hundreds of people. They followed up on thousands of tips. And yet, nothing led them to the boy's identity. The medical examiner's office took photographs of the boy post-mortem, and then they did something that was quite unusual for the time. They had a local mortician prepare the body and open the eyes, styling him to look as if he were alive. They took photographs that they could distribute, hoping someone would recognize him. These photographs were displayed in every police station, post office, and government building in the Philadelphia area. They were published in newspapers across the country. But still, no one came forward to claim him. The lack of identification led investigators to theorize that perhaps this boy had been kept hidden for most or all of his life. Maybe he'd never been enrolled in school. Maybe he'd never seen a doctor, except for whoever had performed that surgery. Maybe the people responsible for his care had kept him isolated, away from anyone who might ask questions or report concerns. As the investigation progressed through 1957 and into 1958, several key pieces of evidence emerged. The bassinet box was traced back to a JC Penney store, but it was a common item sold in numerous locations. The blanket he was wrapped in was made by a company called Kraus, but again, these were mass-produced and sold widely. Investigators found children's clothing near the scene, including a corduroy cap and a scarf, but they couldn't definitively link these items to the boy. One of the more promising leads came from the area where the boy was found. Fox Chase in 1957 was a semi-rural area with scattered homes and small businesses. Just a quarter-mile from where the body was discovered was a foster home that had housed several children over the years. Police interviewed everyone connected to that home, but nothing concrete emerged. Still, the proximity seemed like it couldn't be a coincidence. Throughout the late 1950s and into the 1960s, tips continued to come in. People reported seeing a boy who matched the description with various adults. Some claimed to have seen a boy matching his description in the company of a man and woman in the days before the body was discovered. Others reported seeing a suspicious vehicle in the area. But none of these leads panned out. Each one was investigated thoroughly, but they all led to dead ends. The case began to go cold, but it never died completely. His gravestone simply read, "Heavenly Father, bless this unknown boy." But the Philadelphia Police Department kept the case file active. Officers who worked the case in those early years never forgot about him. Many of them, even decades later, would say that the boy in the box was the case that haunted them most. In 1998, 41 years after the boy was found, the case suddenly exploded back into public consciousness. A woman came forward with a story that seemed to answer all the questions that had plagued investigators for decades. She claimed that the boy was her brother, and she knew exactly what had happened to him. This woman, who became known only as M to protect her identity, told a horrific story of abuse and murder. According to M, her mother had purchased the boy from his biological parents in 1954. This wasn't an official adoption. This was essentially buying a child, which, while illegal, did happen in those days, particularly in poor communities. M claimed her mother was abusive and mentally unstable, and that she had kept the boy in the basement of their home, fed him very little, and beat him regularly. According to M's account, one night her mother had thrown the boy into the bathtub, and his head struck the tub, killing him. Panicked, her mother had cut his hair, cleaned him up, put him in a box, and dumped him in Fox Chase. M claimed she had been there. She had witnessed it all. She even described the house where they had lived and provided specific details about the basement where the boy had been kept. Investigators were initially excited. Finally, after all these years, they might have their answer. They tracked down the house M described. They examined it thoroughly. And here's where the story starts to fall apart. The house M described had no basement. In fact, it had never had a basement. The layout she described didn't match the actual structure. Physical evidence didn't support her story. When investigators dug deeper into M's background, they discovered she had significant mental health issues and a history of making false claims. They also found inconsistencies in her story. Details changed between tellings. Timeline elements didn't add up. While she could have read about the case in newspapers and incorporated those details, much of what she said simply didn't check out when subjected to rigorous investigation. The police never completely dismissed M's story, but they couldn't corroborate it. Without physical evidence, without consistent testimony, Without even a house that matched her description, there was nothing they could charge anyone with, even if her mother had still been alive. M's story became just another theory in a case full of them. But M's story did introduce something that hadn't been seriously considered before: the possibility that this boy had been kept hidden his entire short life. Maybe he really had never been enrolled in school. Maybe he had never been taken to a regular doctor. Maybe the only people who knew he existed were the people who ultimately killed him. Other theories have emerged over the decades. Some investigators believe the boy might have been connected to a nearby carnival that had been in the area around the time his body was discovered. Traveling carnivals in the 1950s sometimes had children traveling with them, and if a child went missing from a carnival, it might not be reported immediately, especially if the child's guardians were transient or had something to hide. Another theory suggested the boy might have been a victim of a pedophile ring. The grooming of his hair and nails, the washing of his body, the careful placement in the box, all suggested someone who cared about his appearance even in death, which some profilers found significant. However, there was no evidence of sexual abuse found during the autopsy. Some theorized he might have been the child of immigrants living in the country illegally who were too afraid to report him missing or claim his body. In 1957, immigration enforcement was very different, but the fear of deportation was still real, and undocumented families sometimes avoided all contact with authorities. Perhaps one of the most heartbreaking theories is the simplest: that he was an unwanted child, possibly born to an unmarried mother or a family that couldn't afford another mouth to feed, and that he died from the cumulative effects of neglect and abuse. His death might not have even been intentional. Perhaps he died from malnutrition or illness, and the people responsible panicked and dumped his body, hoping to avoid prosecution. What all these theories have in common is a profound failure of the systems that should have protected this child. In 1957, America was in the middle of the baby boom. Children were everywhere. Schools were overcrowded. Neighborhoods were full of kids playing in the streets. How could one child slip through every crack? How could no one miss him? The answers to those questions might finally be within reach, thanks to advances in forensic science that didn't exist for most of this case's history. In the 2010s, the Philadelphia Police Department partnered with the VDOC Society, a group of forensic experts who take on cold cases. They exhumed the boy's body in 2019 to collect DNA samples using modern extraction techniques. Traditional DNA testing had been attempted before, but the samples were degraded and the technology wasn't sophisticated enough. But by 2019, genetic genealogy had revolutionized cold case investigations. This is the same technology that caught the Golden State Killer. Even distant relatives, people who share DNA from a great-great-grandparent, can show up in these searches. It's painstaking work, but it's been successful in dozens of cold cases. For the boy in the box, this technology represents the best hope for identification in over 60 years. DNA extracted from his remains is currently being analyzed and compared against genetic databases. The process is slow. It requires not just finding matches, but finding enough matches to build a comprehensive family tree. Then investigators have to trace that tree forward to the 1950s and identify which branch might have had a young boy who disappeared. The process is complicated by the fact that the boy died in 1957. Many of his potential relatives from that era are deceased. Records from that time period are incomplete. Some families didn't participate in activities that would generate records. Birth certificates weren't always filed properly, particularly in rural areas or among poor communities. But investigators remain hopeful. In 2022, the Philadelphia Police Department announced they were continuing to pursue active leads in the case. While they didn't provide specific details, the announcement suggested that the genetic genealogy work was producing results. They asked for continued public patience as they worked to give this boy his name back. The case has also inspired a dedicated community of amateur sleuths and researchers who have kept the boy's memory alive. Online forums discuss theories, share research, and compile information. Some have dedicated years to trying to identify him. They've digitized old newspapers, tracked down descendants of people who lived in the area, and built massive databases of missing children from that era. These citizen investigators have actually made important contributions to the case. They've found potential matches that were forwarded to police. They've uncovered historical details that provided context. They've kept public interest alive, which has been crucial for generating new tips and keeping pressure on authorities to continue working the case. The boy in the box has also become a symbol for all unidentified and missing children. Advocacy groups use his case to highlight the importance of databases like the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, known as NamUs, which was created to prevent cases like this from going unsolved. If NamUs had existed in 1957, this boy might have been identified within days or weeks. Today, the boy rests in a cemetery in northeast Philadelphia. His grave is no longer marked with just "unknown boy." In 2011, his headstone was replaced with one that reads "America's Unknown Child." It's visited regularly by people who want to honor his memory and acknowledge that he mattered, even if no one has yet been able to say his name. Every year on his death anniversary, people gather at his grave. They stand in silence, remembering a little boy who has been waiting for over 6 decades for someone to claim him. Law enforcement officials often attend these gatherings, reminding the public that the case is still active, still being investigated, and that they still believe it can be solved. The investigation into the boy in the box represents something profound about justice and memory. It shows that some cases, some victims, leave such an imprint that they're never truly forgotten, even when decades pass without resolution. His life mattered, his death mattered, and he deserves to have his name back. As we record this, investigators continue their work. DNA analysis continues. Leads are still being followed. Somewhere in the vast databases of genetic information, in the historical records of Philadelphia and beyond, in the memories of people who were alive in 1957, the answer exists. The answer to who this boy was, where he came from, and who took his life. After 68 years, we may finally be approaching the day when America's unknown child becomes known. When that day comes, and investigators believe it will come, it will be a bittersweet moment. Justice delayed is justice denied, and this little boy has been denied justice for far too long. The people responsible for his death are almost certainly deceased by now. There will likely be no trial, no conviction, no formal accountability. But there will be knowledge. There will be a name. There will be the possibility of finding other relatives, people who never knew he existed, who can finally acknowledge him as family. For everyone who has worked on this case, for everyone who has kept his memory alive, that will be enough. Because in the end, this case has never really been about punishment. It's been about recognition. It's been about saying that this child's life had value, that his death mattered, and that society has an obligation to remember even its most vulnerable, forgotten members. The boy in the box may have been abandoned in life and death, but he has never been alone. And someday soon, he will finally have his name back.